about myself and keep it down to manageable time.
Yeah, whatever is best for you. If you want to talk for an hour, you can.
Well,
if you want to do 15 minutes, another person
You're going to edit it anyway.
Yeah,
sure,
I'm going to be
yeah.
cutting a little bit, not too much.
Okay, well, I could get started.
Sure.
Are we ready?
Yeah, you're ready.
Hi.
Rolling.
Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Daniels. I was born in Germany in 1936. The Nazis had already come into power. Actually, they'd been in power for 3 years. I lived alone with my mother because my father had disappeared. I did not know for many, many years what happened to him. As it turns out, he actually moved to China, Shanghai, which was a escape route for thousands and thousands of Jewish people from Germany and Austria. The Chinese government, along with the Japanese government, who actually occupied China at that time, jointly agreed to allow many Jews from these two countries to come in and settle there, which they did. But other than that, I have no idea what happened to him. We've lost track. My mother's lost track of him. So I never really knew him. Actually, I didn't even know what he looked like. So it's just one of those situations. There was no father figure in my life, so I had to be my own. So we lived in Berlin, of course, as I may have mentioned, which was the headquarters of the Nazis. We had to wear a yellow star wherever we went to identify us as Jews. And it was really a dangerous thing not to be wearing that star if in fact your identification card says that you're a Jew. If you were an adult and somebody stopped you, let's say if an officer or SS officer or policeman stopped you and you did not wear a star, if they somehow felt that you are Jewish, they'll ask for your identification. And if your identification says that you're Jewish, or if you had a J on it and you weren't wearing it, you could have been arrested and sent to a concentration camp. Children were probably a little luckier. I guess they did not want to upset just too many people with children, so my mother always told me, make sure you always have your star on, and if in fact I do get arrested or if I do get picked up, they'll probably wind up calling her and she has to bail me out, so to speak. Life was not very pleasant at all because I was not allowed to go to school. I had no friends because I lived alone with my mother. There were no playmates for me, even though there was a wonderful playground down the road that I was not able to go to because it was off limits to Jews. Had wonderful venues in Berlin. They had the movies and they had theater. They had the zoo. The zoo was fabulous, still is today. And those are the things I was not able to participate in. Of course, school was out. I was too young to go to school, but I was not too young to go to a preschool or kindergarten, so that was off limits to me. So besides, also my mother, we were not alone. We were not allowed to own any radio. We did not allow to own a telephone. We were not allowed to own any car. We couldn't afford a car anyway. We were not allowed to use public transportation. So all of the things that made life worth living in any kind of a society was to enjoy the things that the rest of society enjoys. However, Jews were prohibited from enjoying that because the Nazis determined that the Jews were less than human, and they felt that, or at least they acted upon wanting to destroy the whole Jewish population eventually throughout the world. And so the other thing was that my mother, as a Jew, was not able to hire anybody to watch me while she had the great opportunity to have a job. She left every morning to go to work went on public transportation with an identification card that she got from the factory. And there she would spend maybe an hour every morning going to that factory way across town, spent 8 or 9 hours working behind the machine, then coming home again at night, spending another hour, and had to leave me alone all day long because she wasn't able to hire a Jewish nanny or a housekeeper or anything to watch me, because it was against the law, against the Nuremberg laws, as many others, other restrictions were also part of the Nuremberg laws. So I learned very early in my life to be alone. Like I said, I had no friends. I had to kind of do things on my own, which really consisted of doing nothing. I had a few toys. I was able to build some houses for 15,000 times with a few building blocks, a few cars, just a very limited amount of toys, a couple of stuffed toys. But I spent most of my time looking out the window, feeling sorry for myself, feeling very angry at what life life has dealt me. But other than that, I had to go along with what was going on. I mean, there was no choice for my mother. And so she was very concerned that I might misbehave, and I sure did a few times misbehave, out of frustration and anger, being left alone, not having friends, not having any relatives. I had two relatives, but they were murdered. Well, one was murdered. It was my grandmother, who actually was murdered on earlier in my life. She was put into a ghetto up in another country called Latvia. There she, along with thousands and thousands of other women and children and elderly men, were taken to the local forest, and there they were massacred. A period of about a week and a half, about 20,000 of them were massacred, and then they closed the camp down, or the ghetto down. So that was my first tragedy that I never really knew, because I never even knew her. I was not able to visit with her because we were restricted to where we lived. We couldn't take public transportation or private transportation. My grandfather died of natural causes, and so that left my mother and me. And we had to struggle on. This was now going on 1942. I was now 6 years old, still unable to go to school, still had no friends. I was really very, what's the right word, very immature. I didn't know what was going on in the world. I had no concept of what the world was like. I didn't know the geography of Germany. I had no idea that there was a country called France or Belgium or Holland. All I knew, I didn't even think of a bigger country than Germany. I just knew the neighborhood that we lived in and we walked in. My mother was not, she was not that concerned about me being so naive about what was going on. She had to struggle to find work so she could pay the rent and buy some food for us. We would be out walking around trying to find some food. The limitations about the days of the week you can shop for food for the Jews, and they were limited. By the time our day came by and our hour came by that we could shop for food, either stores were closed or there was very little food left. And I always tell my listeners that there was no such thing as not 7-Eleven, I'm talking about 24/7 type of supermarkets. Everything was limited in third world, like a third world country then, even in other parts of the world. You know, you have to go to a bakery to get a loaf of bread. You got to go to the 2 miles away to a butcher shop to get a cut of meat. Then you got to go another around the corner and go to another store to get. So shopping became an adventure. If you wanted to visit all the stores, most of the time there was nothing left for them, or they didn't want to sell us anything because we had the Jewish star on our lapel. So things were getting very, very dicey. Thousands and thousands of Jews had already either disappeared. I had from Berlin, what I was familiar with. I mean, I'm not even talking about the rest of Germany, I'm just talking about Berlin, which of course housed the majority of Jewish people. Probably like 150,000 Jews were living in Berlin at the time. The rest were Frankfurt and Hamburg and some of the other big cities. And so many of them were able to escape early on to other European countries. Some went into hiding, some got phony documents, some were able to pass off as Germans. So some were enterprising enough, and I admire that they did that, but eventually they were caught, because in 1943, when there was this massive roundup of Jews, they paid local people, local residents, money, blood money, to turn in Jews that they knew were living still in Germany. Could have been a neighbor of theirs, could have been an ex-partner of theirs, or a person they did business with, or anything. They would turn them into the Nazis, and They would get paid money for it. So, all for naught in some situation like that. So this is kind of what my life was like at the beginning of my early years until we were taken to the concentration camp. We were arrested, and one of the things I tell my audiences, my kids especially, who don't know very much, I said, when you get arrested, the presumption is that you've done something wrong. So the police arrest you, and then they find out you didn't, and they release you. But at least they have to arrest you so they can figure out who committed the crime. In Germany, we were arrested because we were Jewish. So there was nothing wrong with being Jewish, but that's what you got arrested for. That is the difference between being arrested here and also being arrested in Germany. So when I say we got arrested, it was for being Jews. We went into a detention center, and we were housed there for a number of weeks until many more Jews were being rounded up. We were in a bomb shelter. There were in a bomb shelter that we were housed in. We were not allowed to leave. More Jews were being rounded up. And I tell the story one time while we were in that detention center, I fell sick, I fell ill, my skin was turning yellow, I was presumed I had some kind of a contagious disease, and it just so happened right at that time, within the hour that I started to feeling bad, there was a higher level Nazi official making the rounds in this detention center, and he was there to make sure everything was going fine. So he was the one that ordered me to go to a local hospital to be quarantined until whatever contagiousness I had would be passing. I still don't know to this day what exactly was wrong with me, but I know I was feeling very bad and my skin was yellow, so there was something going on. And so this Nazi decided to not to take a chance and have me pass on or infect anybody else with this unknown disease. So I was in the hospital for about a week, and then I was sent back to the detention center because it's whatever I had passed. And it turned out that for those people who know a little bit about the Nazi hierarchy, that Nazi guy who sent me to the hospital was Adolf Eichmann. So he played a prominent role in the Holocaust. He was in charge of the concentration camps. He was a big character. He was one of the high-level Nazis that escaped to Argentina, I believe it was, and there he was caught many years later after the war. And so once I came back in from the hospital, my mother and I, along with the rest of the people inside of the detention center, were taken to the trains. Excuse me, and there we were put onto the cattle cars. We were heading out to Czechoslovakia, to the concentration camp where we were going to be housed. The cattle car was, I can never really describe the unpleasantness, but there were no benches, chairs, or tables, nothing. All you could do was stand there, or if you're old and you couldn't stand very long, you had to sit there, you had to sit down. People made room for them, but elderly people were not able to stand for any length of time while we were either waiting to go or on the way. The transport was stopping, was starting, was stopping. It took about 30 hours for us to leave Berlin to go to Theresienstadt, which was a little Terezin fortress that was around for a long time, and the Germans took it over and added the name Theresienstadt there to designate a little town, a little camp. So we were all cramped in that little cattle car. It was smelly. There was no food. There was no water. I remember being able to sit down once in a while, a little suitcase with me. The rest of the time I had to stand. Somebody else wanted to sit down. They had to stand. And the people were moaning, and it just was absolutely a very detestable, unpleasant experience. We got into Terezin, which was the fortress town around that. We got out of that little train station. We had to walk now to the camp because it was about a mile away. Years later, as a footnote, years later, the railhead actually was built to continue on inside of the camp. The reason that was done is because many thousands of people from our camp were put onto the trains inside of the camp and were sent to Auschwitz, where of course many of them were murdered. So we had to walk single file to the camp while the soldiers were walking alongside of us, using their flashlights to show the way, which way we were going. The elderly people were not able to walk, so they had to get some trucks to come and pick them up. And my mother and I, with many of the other people, I remember walking along. It seemed like forever. We finally got inside of the camp in the middle of the night. We were able to find a place to sleep. Next morning we were woken. We had to line up in a big field, and we had to be processed inside of the camp. They had a soldier sitting behind a desk. Our name was called from the master list. We stepped up to the soldier's desk. We had to empty out all of our pockets. We had to empty out all of our baggage. Whatever we had to lay it on the table. And there the soldier made a notation of what was there, and either put it in one box to be taken away or given back to me, whatever they didn't want. But it turned out these guys were just stealing almost everything away from the Jews who had come into this concentration camp. Not only our concentration camp, but thousands of concentration camps. Everybody lost their personal possessions. Sometimes it was valuable. Sometimes they had a piece of gold. I mean, maybe a ring or a pendant or a necklace. They just took everything away. And the nice clothing that we bought in, they took that also away. Left me with very little. I had one pair of shoes left, and I had to wear those one pair of shoes for 2 years in that camp. And by the time the Red Cross came in to bring some food and water for us, or food and medicine after the end of the war, they finally brought in a pair of shoes that fit me. I wouldn't take those shoes off for 3 days and 3 nights. I was so proud of having those shoes because I had to wear, and I threw the other ones away. So anyway, we finally got there. We went through this process of giving up our clothing and everything. We didn't have to wear uniforms. Interestingly enough, that was only in some of the other camps. We did not have to wear uniforms. I know I didn't. We just wore whatever clothing we had, but eventually they became kind of tattered also. And so we had to kind of change clothing, but we really had to make do with what we had. When that was all done, we were still very hungry. We hadn't eaten anything since we had left, before we left the detention center in Germany. Finally, we were allowed to be going to where we were escorted out. The adults were escorted out to one section of the camp, which was for adults, and these people became workers, they became slaves. I went along with a bunch of children my own age, and we went to a children's village. A village meaning inside of the camp. It was all barbed wired in. They were children my age, boys my own age. There was one barracks for the children, for the boys, and 2 barracks for the girls. They were a little bit older than we were. They had one barracks for girls who were like 13, 14, 15, another barracks for the girls who were younger than that. But for the boys, they just dumped us all into one barracks, 2-story buildings. They were used by the soldiers for many, many years ago while this was a fortress. Still 2 stories high. There were pallets and bunk beds. There were 3 high. I remember walking in there and I saw these kids there. I wasn't lonely anymore. Well, that didn't last very long because the kids didn't want another playmate, that's for sure. And so I tried to get into the top bunk there, but there was no ladder or anything like that. We took a bunk, so I had to sleep on the floor for probably for about a week or 10 days until I was able to figure out how to get to the top bunk, or maybe to the middle bunk. But we had to sleep on the floor. Those of us who came in late, we had to sleep on the floor, which was nothing but dirt, and also underneath the bunks. And what was a big worry? A big worry was that we would wake up in the morning, and also that we would find some food. So in the mornings, our first meal came. The meal consisted of warm water. Most of the prisoners called it potato peel soup because that's really all that was inside there, or some other vegetable floating around, and then a piece of bread, and that was it. And so this is what I lived on for a couple of years. I was able to get more food in the middle of the day to...
There's a tissue, and I don't know where I put mine. I had some in my pocket. I don't know. Is there any tissues in here? Oh, here they are. Perfect. Continue.
Okay.
Thanks.
And so kids, we would wait in the morning for it to be fed. We all knew what was going to be, but it wasn't nutritious enough for us. But we still were able to somehow survive on that. However, not many kids really did because of the starvation diet that we were under. It didn't really matter very much to the Nazis. Who cared? And so a lot of the kids started to die in the camp itself. Probably about 5,000 kids died in the 2 years I was there. Actually, during the 3 years that the camp was in existence, over 5,000 kids died of either disease or malnutrition, starvation. They didn't die of any violent deaths until they were sent to Auschwitz. Most of the children actually went to Auschwitz, which was, of course, the main death camp in that system. And once the kids got to Auschwitz, along with their grandparents and their younger siblings, or the disabled, or the undesirables, or the sickly, those were the ones that went to the gas chambers. And practically all of the kids that left Theresienstadt to Auschwitz went to the gas chambers because they were too young to be part of the workforce over there. And so that was the fate of many of the children. I was able to, somebody asked me recently, why was I able to stay to the very end? We came in 43. We were there for almost 2 years. The reason was because my mother was working in the slave section of the camp, and what she was doing, along with some of the other women, was more important work. They wanted to keep her. It was repairing army uniforms. They had when soldiers got wounded or got killed, they didn't throw those uniforms out. They actually bundled them up and sent it on to Theresienstadt and maybe some other camp also, where they were actually mending these uniforms, because this is now in 1944, and the war wasn't going very well for the Germans. Finances were getting tight. They were not able to buy or make another more uniforms, so they had to recycle. In those days, you didn't use that word recycle, but that's what they were doing. And so my mother was doing that because she was a good seamstress and she knew how to work those machines very well. And so that kept her there, and as long as she was alive there, and I was able to stay along with it. Had she been sent to Auschwitz, which we almost did, I would have gone with her. Or if she had died, and a lot of people died in that camp, but like I said, about 35,000. The children who didn't die along with them, they were sent to Auschwitz as orphans, and when they were orphans, they were murdered in the gas chamber. So my mother and I, of course, were very, very lucky that we were able to live that out. I was able to get some work done. I was able to do some work along with some other boys who were getting a little bit bigger. And what we were doing, we were loading up the clothing and all the valuables that were taken away from us when we came in. They had some of the women repackage all those things, put them into boxes, put them into parcels, and put them into manageable containers so they could put them into the truck and ship back to Germany to give them out to the thrift shops. And this is what I, along with about a dozen other kids, boys, mostly were doing. We were just loading up these boxes. It didn't happen that often. It wasn't really essential. The reason they had us doing it because they didn't want to take the adults away from some of the work that they were doing, which they considered to be more essential. So they says, let the kids do it. And sure enough, after a while, I was able to convince them that I could do the work. I knew that we were going to get an extra bowl of water and a piece of bread if we did the work, so everybody was fighting for these jobs. I didn't get chosen all the time, but I got chosen enough where I was able to get another piece of bread, maybe once every other month or maybe once a month. It seems like it's not enough, and it really wasn't, but it was better than nothing. And so that was sort of my little experiences there with a lot of the other kids. Sometimes I fail to mention, but I do want to mention about the children who were murdered during the Holocaust, the Jewish children who were murdered during the Holocaust. It turned out to be, if you don't know, it's 1.5 million children murdered during the Holocaust, and murdered either forcibly starving them to death, going to the gas chambers, getting killed, murdered in these big pits like my grandmother was. Yeah, 10% of these children came from our camp. 15,000 children came to our camp. And out of the 15,000, 100 survived, and I was one of the survivors. I didn't know about this for many years after I got out of the camp and came to America. I only learned about it when I was reading one of the Holocaust books, and I realized how lucky I really was. My mother survived also. We went back to Berlin. We were in quarantine for about a month because there was a big typhus epidemic going on in our camp. The Red Cross came in, brought in clothing, food, shelter, and medicine. They're the ones that quarantined the camp because of the massive epidemic going on. Another 350 people died in that 1 month period. So finally, that had passed. My mother and I, along with all the inmates, we just scattered for the four winds. I have no idea how my mother, what decision was made, why we went back to Berlin. I just wanted to get out of that camp. I was already, feeling a little better. I was able to, get a little bit on my own. I was putting on a little bit of weight, a little bit, not much. We went back to Berlin. It was blasted to smithereens by the U.S. Army and the Soviets. So we spent a couple of months in Berlin, and then she decided that she was going to go to southern Germany to a refugee camp. They had these DP camps, displaced person camps. They were scattered throughout Germany for the most part, but with thousands upon hundreds of thousands of people who were lucky not to have been killed during the Holocaust, but they are survivors, and they had no place to go anymore. They had no homes left. Many of them came from Poland. When they were taken, they had to give up their homes, their businesses. When they went back to try to claim their businesses, their neighbors refused to allow them to take those businesses back. About 100 survivors got killed trying to recoup some of their losses. Just getting a little shoe store back, or a little bakery store, clothing, tail, or something like that. Nothing big. We're just talking about little businesses, a little bit of a home. They just lost their lives trying to get that back. So these were many of the tragedies that the displaced persons had during that time. So we went to a refugee camp and spent 2 more years there, which was a voluntary camp over there. We had my mother had to apply. Actually, it was my stepfather at that time. My mother got married to another survivor. We put in for a visa to come to America. We had to wait 2 years to be approved, and then after 2 years we came to America. No schooling, no language skills, just a dumb kid, really very unsophisticated for 11 years old. So I had to really start my life, from scratch over again. So that's kind of a little bit of a capsule from my birth on to coming to America.
And okay, so that's what you want to say. Can I ask questions now? Do you mind?
You could. Well, we have 4 kids, and between them they have 9 grandchildren. Their grandchildren to me, not to her. And we tried not to push anything on them because kids are a little bit too young. I think they learned when they were about 15 or 14 or 15. They began to understand. They knew I was a Holocaust survivor. Some of them, actually, a couple of them actually had little projects in school at that time. Nothing from the museum quality, but sometimes they had to write a paper for their English class, and they wanted to find some character to write about, or they wanted to, just talk about an experience. So they started to do that. All 4 of them are fine. They're familiar with my story. They've listened to it. They have videos. They have got a book that I was in. Not that I wrote a book, but a little chapter in the book. As far as the grandchildren, the 9 grandchildren, the 2 oldest grandchildren know about me and my Holocaust experience. One of them is going to Princeton right now. He's 20 and 19 and 20. The other one's going to be 17. So they are pretty much aware of it. The rest of them are a little too young. They're like 11 and 8 and so forth, and they're not quite ready for that. Although actually the 11-year-old girl, actually, I think she had to write some pictures for her grade school about something like that. So the parents are okay with it.
My project basically is based, I want to kind of implicate the fact that it needs to be remembered like throughout the next generations. Now that it's been a long time since it happened, and soon there's going to be no survivors here to testify in person as you are doing right now. Do you feel like it's important that we continue like passing it to our children? Do you feel like there's certain methods that should be applied, maybe in classrooms, maybe even reflecting back into what's going on in Israel with the there's a lot of poverty within survivors right now. The way they're living isn't to, to the way that, there's a Holocaust right now in Syria. Like, or Trump, wanting to have a wall. Do you have any opinions on what's going on and, like, within memory and the fact that it's not being remembered enough to...
Well, I'm out of philosophy, and I don't want to get into any of the political situation. There's enough reason to discuss this without really getting into the political situation. I usually tell people, well, first of all, I have no control of what happens after I pass away. Personal testimonies, of course, are good, and most of survivors have made videos, whether it's with the Shoah Foundation or whether it's with other private individuals, and I've been videotaped many times, although I hardly ever have seen the final result. But as long as it's done, it's fine. But I have a couple of things to say. Number one, if people have to understand that it happened, and if they don't understand what happens, if you can kind of convince those people who don't understand it, who don't want to understand it, is to talk to the German government. The German government today acknowledges what the Holocaust has happened. It took a long time for the German people as an institution, the government as an institution, to acknowledge that the Holocaust was their undoing or their doing. But little by little, the government came around. There was a lot of pressure put on by different other countries. And now, up for 10 or 15 years after the Holocaust happened, you never would find it in their textbooks at all. There was little footnotes going on, but not really anything in detail. But little by little, certain books started coming out and certain films started coming out, and the Germans realized that they had better, understand and make sure that the people understand also. And they've been pretty good at it. Now, I'm not talking about the population. I'm talking about the government itself, its institutional aspect of it. I think they're very upfront about it. And so they were the one that says, yes, it happened and we're responsible. Now, if you go to a perpetrator, and you can't lie about that perpetrator. If the perpetrator feels guilty, so, oh yes, I did it, absolutely. Who are you to argue that they didn't do it, okay? And so that, and people who refuse to acknowledge it, or people who don't want to discuss it, all that, to me are either very naive, or they just are, I went to a Holocaust deniers meeting once many years ago. It was about 24 guys. They didn't know I was Jewish, they didn't know anything, but I just listened in. They spent an hour trying to raise money. That's all they talked about. They go onto the streets, or they go onto the parades, and they yell this and this and all. But when they get in their own circle, and they have a meeting going on like every other month, their whole point is, well, we got to raise some money so we can afford the paper. They have nothing to talk about. So I don't really, I'm not that about that. I worry mostly about college institutions. I really have to tell you, I'm just worried about institutions of higher learning. I went to college, I went to the university, but it was a long time ago. I graduated in '68. We didn't have too much of this. But today, most major colleges, and I'm not indicting them at all, you can we've taken free speech to the nth degree. You can say whatever you want, you can say whatever, all that. And when you say, hey, wait a minute, that's not really right, it says, well, it's freedom of speech. Well, how can you argue with the freedom of speech issue, right? But I just don't, somebody asked me, could the Holocaust ever happen again in America? I don't think so. I like the fact that we are very diverse. We've got, I don't know how many different, 30 or 40 different countries that we represent, ethnic groups, and Koreans and Vietnamese and Mexicans and South Americans and all that. You're never going to get everybody together and says, well, let's kill all the Jews. This is just not going to happen. But if it's a homogeneous type of a society, where the majority of the population is the same, whether it's ethnic root or whether it's language and all that, you never know. They can be manipulated. They can be manipulated to do harm to one group or another. I don't think it'll happen in America, even with all the anti-Semitic rhetoric that's going on. I wish they would stop it. But if we stop it, then where does the First Amendment come in, and where do we get criticized for the First Amendment? So it's a real double-edged sword. That I don't really have an answer for it. But you know what? A Pew poll just came out, the Pew Research. They said that Jews, for the most part, are the most favorable group in America. Not by much. Not by much. They had like 4,000 people. Now, I don't know if that's a good sample at all, but it's not by much. They actually, the majority of people, only by a couple of percentage points, said the Jewish people are our favorite people. However, 2 or 3 percentage points afterwards came the Catholics. So that's okay, and so down the road. So it wasn't a big margin that, is overwhelmingly, but they were not down the bottom. They were not even in the middle of the list. So there's something the Jewish population here in America is doing that's right. At least the poll numbers show that they're okay with it. And as long as that goes on, maybe we have hope at all.
One last quick question on a different note. As a kid in the camps, how did you what was going on through your head? What kept you going in terms of maybe future? Like, was it the thought of being with your mom again and somewhere else? Was it maybe faith? How does a kid see all these bad things, and feel basically, how did you
Well,
deal
I
with
think
it?
I think the key is not knowing. I think I myself, some of the other kids that I came in contact with, even as adults, one of the things they talk about is that we don't know what was going on. We knew we were in a concentration camp, we knew that we were starving, blah, 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 but we didn't have any concept of what was going to go on next. It's like a one day at a time type of a syndrome. You don't know. I never looked forward to a week. I never looked forward to 3 days. To me, I look forward to tonight. I went to bed, and I hope I'll wake up in the morning. And we woke up in the morning, thank God, and then says, I hope I make it through the day. Maybe today I'll get an extra piece of bread. That's as far as my understanding of what's going on went on. I didn't go beyond that. I knew my 7th birthday. I knew what day it was because I came in June 30th, and my birthday is July 8th, so I knew it was close enough. But I never knew when my 8th birthday was. I didn't keep the calendar. There was nothing. I didn't say, oh, we're going to have a birthday party next week, or there's going to be a cake, or there's going to be a present. Nothing. It's like we didn't exist. And our environment didn't even exist that way, except for just the focusing on getting something to eat and staying alive. And so, to me, it was like a one day at a time. I don't have anything more to say.
Okay, that's perfect.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
That your father went to China. Did you ever find him or figure out, how did you know that he went there?
Well, my mother found out after the war, and it was years after the war. I have no idea how she found out. But believe it or not, there's a book out. There are lots of books out, and this book is at the other museum, and it's called Berlin Jews That Went to China Between These Dates. Very precise. So I opened up the book and I looked at it, and there's my father's name. I knew what his name is. I took it from my birth certificate. But his father and mother, and he was a young man, and his mother and father, and I think a couple of siblings and all that. Yeah, he was right there. But there was nothing entered in there. What happened to him? I don't think he would have died. He was too young. I don't think that many Jews died there. They flourished. They didn't become wealthy. They lived. They had their struggles and all that. Their housing wasn't that great, but they were living there fine. So, but I don't know what happened to him. If he moved away, if they moved to South America, maybe, because we know that Jews eventually moved to the 4 corners of the world. So I have no idea what happened to him. I was just a curiosity. I have no emotional connection to him whatsoever.
Yeah.
Great. Anyway, you guys can,
one more
if you
question.
have anything. Okay.
I have one more question.
Go.
Yeah, go ahead.
What about your Jewish identity throughout the whole time? I don't know if you grew up with a strong one, or like how it changed from now, how you raised your kids. Like, talk a little about it.
Yeah, it changed. First of all, we were nominal Jews, meaning that we were not religious. Of course, in Germany, the Reformation started there in Germany, which actually brought in Reformed Jews who were not quite as religious, who practiced it a little differently. My mother, we never even talked about religion. Remember, I was born in '36. I was 2 years old when Kristallnacht happened, the night of broken glass. And this is where synagogues got burned down, they got destroyed, businesses got destroyed. Over 100 Jews were killed during that time. There were like 30,000 of them were sent to Dachau. Some were released. So it was a terrible time. So that alone added to my mother's inability to even teach me anything. Even if she knew much about Judaism, I don't think she did, frankly, but she couldn't have sent me any place to learn. The synagogues were closed, they were destroyed. In 1938, 1939, this is when the big migration of Jews, they left, religious Jews or teachers or something, they might have been in hiding or they may have been able to get out. So there was nobody there to teach me anything. So I grew up with no Judaism whatsoever. Except I knew, but my mother says, be careful, you have to wear the star because you're a Jew. So there was a conflict going on. My feeble little 5-year-old mind couldn't grasp it. I was curious. And then I came to America and I wanted to survive, I wanted to work, I wanted to go to school and all that. So, but when I got married, my wife was not very religious at all, but we do observe. We do observe holidays, we used to have with the kids, we used to have Shabbat dinner. Not a very religious sense, but observant. And we're still that way. We have Jewish artifacts in our home. We've been to Israel. We have some friends who live in Israel. We have relatives who live in Israel. We support one of the settlements there, the kibbutz. We send money there. So in that particular sense, we've evolved. I have more so, and she has also, in a way. Okay?
Thank you.